All right, welcome to the next edition of the Coffee Chat podcast brought to you by Adventus. Today we've got Nick John. He's a student at University of Illinois in Urbana, and he's going to be graduating in 2028, which means that, as you know, Nick is a freshman. Nick just finished his freshman year, so congrats to you, sir, on that. 1 year down, a few more to go. Let's just kick things off with tell us a little bit more about yourself. Specifically, we'd love to hear more about where you grew up, how'd you end up at U of I, and most importantly, what's that career goal after you graduate?
Yeah, of course. So, my name is Nicholas John. I'm a freshman studying finance and accountancy at the University of Illinois. I'm from Naperville, Illinois, and I decided to attend the University of Illinois because I'm a hometown kid. It's always been the university that I've watched growing up. I was a big fan of their athletics, took a tour of their campus, fell in love. My mom went to the school, so deep ties to the school always made sense to me. And my career goals after graduating are I want to land an investment banking internship for the summer 2027 in Chicago, which will then hopefully translate into a full-time offer as an investment banking analyst in Chicago.
All right, love it. What obviously I'm biased because I'm in Chicago. I think everybody knows that. Chicago is a great city to do banking in, but not the only city. There's a lot of great cities to do banking in. Um, but what I like about your goal, though, is it's really specific. It's not too far from your geography, right? You're at Urbana-Champaign, so it's not too bad of a car ride or a train ride up. And it gives you a defined geography to laser focus on, but then you're flexible on the type of bank, right? If
Yep.
you said only Chicago, only bulge bracket, I would probably tell you, hey, you're probably tightening it a little bit too much, but at least be something to be aware of. But at least this way you get to focus on really a variety of banks, and you can focus on the big middle markets that are in Chicago. You can focus on the bulges that are in Chicago, and really explore a few different bank types, which should give you about 6 to 8 really good banks to sort of go at, which is a good number. There's no perfect number of banks to target. Somewhere in that 6 to 8 range is typical. If you get too many more than that, it gets really hard to keep track of. Hard to really go deep with each one. If you get fewer than that, then you're probably taking a really high risk approach because it doesn't, it's hard to get an offer, right? So, cool, cool. So, really great goal on focusing on Chicago. It just gives you a nice goal to sink your teeth into and really laser focus on. Also makes it easier to get in person and again get up to the city and visit, which is a theme that one of the common themes you'll hear us say is pound the pavement, get in front of people, shake hands, right? Get out there. You've got to do that. And with your goal being within a reasonable proximity of where you're at, obviously that's just a natural advantage you have. So why not take advantage of it? Plus the alumni network, right? Tightly connected, Urbana, Chicago. So I think that's a pretty strategic choice. But I do see here, Nick, that you also asked, hey, what what's the deal with recruiting for multiple cities? How do I go about that? Is that a good idea? Tell me a little bit more about that. You've mentioned Chicago in your goal, but then you also asked us here to discuss the idea about recruiting for multiple cities and how to do that. So tell me a little bit more about geography. Chicago's your primary, but what are some of those secondary markets you're looking at?
Yeah, of course. So I've always wanted to work in Chicago because I grew up in the Chicago suburbs. My family lives around here. It just makes sense to me because I wanted to settle in Chicago long term. However, as you probably know, every finance major considers going to New York at some point in their career just because it seems to be like the golden ticket to every exit opportunity. It seems to be the end goal for a lot of people to make it to New York. However, I'm wondering if it's realistic as a student coming from a non target school to recruit for multiple cities at once. For example, recruiting for Chicago and New York at the same time, with New York being like the primary target, the one that I want more, but Chicago being kind of a safety option in case New York doesn't work out. Or on the flip side, maybe recruiting for smaller cities that are a little less competitive than even Charlotte or than Chicago, such as Charlotte or cities in Florida. I know those areas typically have investment banking offices, but they're a bit less competitive than New York, Chicago, San Francisco. So I was just wondering if that's like a viable option to recruit across multiple different cities.
All right. Awesome question, Nick. Wow. Really great question. I like your thought process there. You've got a primary you're focusing on, but you don't want to miss opportunities that are out there, and so you want to explore some additional cities. I like how you frame the question. Do you go for the big, the big apple, right? The world famous international city that's been a finance capital of the world for a long time, or do you do for a secondary market, a smaller market, where the dynamics are definitely going to be very different. So there's two main things you need to consider. The first one, to state the obvious, is going to be logistics. Let's just think about logistics for a minute. If you add another city, look, it's very going back to the fundamentals. You got to get there in person. The more you can get there in person, the better it is for you. It doesn't mean you can't recruit there never going in person, but that's going to be a lot tougher given that you're not a core school potentially from a New York perspective. So the logistics is going to be challenging. Think about is how much risk, how does your risk profile change? Because this is all about risk, right? How do I make good investment decisions with your time, and will it pay off in the return that you're looking for? Ultimately, and there's some risk involved. That's what this is all about. So the question is it a good use of your time? If you only have so many trips, so many ways to get off campus and get into the big city, whichever city it is, and shake hands and meet folks, is it wise for you to use time you could be in Chicago and spend it in New York? That's a bit of a judgment call. I would say the more time you focus in one big market, and Chicago is a pretty big market. It's not as big as New York. There's no question about that. New York is much larger in terms of banking opportunities, but it's also much more competitive. So I wonder, I don't have actual numbers on this, but it's at least just as competitive as Chicago as number of people, like supply and demand, number of jobs available versus number of people. I would venture to guess it's more competitive, meaning there's going to be more job seekers as compared to jobs versus New York. That would be my assessment. Again, I don't have any hard data to demonstrate that, but that's my instinct. Mostly because you've got a lot of international students that are going to be targeting New York, coming from Europe, coming from some Singapore, from Asia, a lot of folks. So, and that would play somewhat similar on the West Coast, like a San Francisco as well, coming from the Far East, from China and Japan. But then you have folks coming from all over the country wanting to go to New York, right? So you're going to find it a lot more competitive. That's probably number one, and just the logistics of getting out there. You can definitely, but let me be clear, you could definitely do it. You could definitely do it, but it's just going to be a little more tax. It's going to be more taxing on you. You're going to have to do more trips. You're going to have to spend a little bit more money, and you're going to have to increase the number of firms that you're recruiting at. So the logistics are going to be a challenge, but it's not insurmountable. You could definitely do it. I would say that unless you've got some really strong leads in New York, you're probably increasing the risk of your overall search of not getting multiple offers. And I think at Aventus here, that's the way we like to phrase it. This is about getting multiple offers. If you only get one offer, then you kind of got lucky. But if you got multiple offers, then you know you were doing something right and you've got options. So just a couple things to think about. So that's one thing, which is all about logistics I just talked about, and the increased logistical challenges you'll have of getting in person, coming from a non-core school. You got to get in person, and getting in person in New York. The second thing I would say, now this is a little more nuanced, and this one is probably not well understood by folks who haven't been on the other side of the table when it comes to recruiting, or at least been through the full process. But that's about your story. That's about your story. You've got to have a narrative, meaning specifically you'll answer the questions, why are you interested in investment banking? Why are you interested in this city? Why are you interested in this firm? These are questions you're going to have the answers to, and they're very difficult to shape. I'll just tell you that right now. You've got to have a lot of networking conversations to deliver a great answer. It's tough to deliver a great answer to that. Now, the good news is you've got until January of next year to kind of figure that out. So the sooner you start, the better. And hopefully this helps you start to think about it a little bit. But when you go to New York, because going back to your original question was all about if I go to a second market, should it be New York or should it be a smaller market, right? The trouble with going to New York and Chicago is that you're going to have to build two different narratives. Because if you start talking to a bunch of bankers in New York and they ask where else you're recruiting, and you start talking about you're looking at Baird in Chicago or you're looking at, Jeffries in Chicago, they're going to be like, what the hell is wrong with you? Now, maybe I'm exaggerating a little bit. All right. I'm trying to make a point. What I'm trying to say is that that's an inconsistent narrative because it's pretty unusual for someone to be gung ho about bulge bracket in New York, who's then also dabbling in Chicago middle market, for example. That tends to tell a bit of an inconsistent story, and it could end up being a weakness in your profile. Something to consider. The way you get around that is you have two different narratives. One narrative you're telling the middle markets in Chicago, and another narrative you're telling a bulge bracket in New York. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong. It's not. You're allowed to have two goals. Okay, you're a complex human being. You're allowed to have more than two goals. So there's nothing inherently like dishonest with that. So that's not the issue. The issue is just when you put out multiple stories of what your goals are. If again the New York firm hears both, then that's going to just create confusion. They're going to be like, oh, well, I thought Nick told me this, and then I hear this. So that's something that's out there to consider. Again, neither of these things I've pointed out are end-all, be-all deal breakers. You can absolutely recruit for both and recruit for both successfully, and many people have. I'm simply trying to help you see ahead, a couple steps ahead of where some of the trouble spots might come up. So I say all that to say, the small markets make more sense to me. They make more sense to me. You could go to a city like Milwaukee. You could go to a city like St. Louis. You could go to a city like Nashville. You go to a city like, you mentioned Charlotte already, Atlanta. Here, look at the map. Just draw a circle. Cleveland, right? Cincinnati. I'm going Pittsburgh, right? I'm going Philly. I don't know. I'm going on and on. But like, there are banks in all of those towns. The smaller the market, the more boutiquey the banks get. But if that actually could be pretty interesting because you can find some really cool boutique banks, and if you gel with the bankers that are there, and then go for it, right? The drawback to a lot of the smaller markets is you're going to be more just-in-time hiring, right? They're going to be less giant firm, super formalized, very long recruiting lead times. So there you go. Okay. So I guess what are your reactions to that, Nick? I mean, are you more interested in New York City, less interested? Are you more interested in small markets, less interested? How does all that land with you?
Yeah, thank you so much for that answer. That was super informative. It really showed me a lot about like what banks are looking for. I knew the story was important, but I didn't realize just how important it would be. And that's something to keep in mind that if I'm recruiting across multiple cities, whether it's New York or smaller markets, I should be prepared to have different stories to appeal to the recruiters at those different cities. But what's on my mind now is I've always been like a Chicago person, so I think I do have my eyes set on Chicago. One thing I was wondering based on that response is if you do recruit across multiple cities, is it important not to recruit at the same firms? So, for example, should you not recruit for IB Goldman Sachs in Chicago and IB Goldman Sachs in New York? And going off of that, could you recruit for IB Goldman Sachs Chicago and like sales and trading Goldman Sachs New York? Is that something that's like feasible or?
Whew, good question. I'll do my best to answer, and I'll just say, take what I'm saying with a grain of salt. At the end of the day, we want to empower you to get these answers to these questions through networking. Talk to the real Goldman Sachs bankers, right? But you can ask. But I'm a safe space. You can ask me these types of questions. I'll give you the best answer I have. What I would say on that is, I liked how you said Goldman Sachs. Let's take these examples one at a time because they're unique and different. So if you're recruiting and you've decided Goldman Sachs is my number one, you just decided it, right? That's my firm. Come hell or high water, I'm going to do everything I can to break into Goldman. Do bulge bracket banking, let's go. That's a fine goal. If that's your goal, then recruiting across multiple cities, New York, Chicago, San Francisco, Maybe there's another office that you've got your eye on. Recruit for all of them because it's a consistent story, right? All you got to tell them is Goldman's my number one. It's Goldman or bust. I'm going to be a Goldman banker, or I don't care. I'm looking at every city that has a sizable Goldman office. But you see how that's a clean and clear narrative?
Yeah.
People at Goldman are going to hear that and be like, okay, this guy gets it. We're the best, right? Because that's what Goldman's going to say. And most firms feel that way, because they've got strong cultures. So that's one way you can get around the city thing is by laser focusing on a firm. And now, could you say that at a couple other firms? Yeah, maybe. Maybe you could say that with your with your JPMs and your Morgan Stanleys, kind of some of those like elite bulges. Then absolutely. But what you're doing is you're getting flexible on city in your narrative because you're laser focused on the firm. All right. So that's one way to approach it. Now, it would be weird if you were recruiting for Goldman investment banking in New York and then Goldman sales and trading, I don't know, in Chicago. That would be kind of weird. But likely those processes are run by very different people who don't probably interact and share notes about recruiting. I'm guessing. I don't know that. Find out for sure by talking to real people who are at Goldman through your networking process. But my guess would be there's probably not a lot of interconnection between those two because of how large the firms are, how far away, and how those are different business units basically. But that's what I would say. The key is though, like, but I would ask you if that was your goal. I personally, like, as your advisor, as just someone doing networking with you, I'd be like, Nick, what's wrong with you, man? What are you doing? Like, why are you recruiting for sales and trading over here and banking over here? You're just making your life harder. And that's, I would argue, is a high risk approach that doesn't pay off. Like, the risk reward isn't there to take that extra risk of spreading yourself thin across those different roles. So I would actually kind of put that back on you and be like, pitch me on why you think it's intelligent to recruit for both sales and trading and investment banking in different cities. You know what I mean? Because maybe you've got a great reason. I don't know. I'm not questioning you. I'm just saying, like, you need a really, really good reason. Maybe you have a family member or a friend who was a really influential sales and trading person in Chicago, and so that's something that you kind of always were interested in. But then you were, looking at banking, and that was interesting too. I mean, if you've got a story as to why, then it can work. But if you're just sort of like shooting in the dark and just testing stuff out, then it's probably not a good idea. Like, because really, I would go back to networking, man. That's why we have networking. The purpose of networking is to help you get the answers to these questions on a deep level before you have to make a commitment. And so that kind of leads perfectly into the next question here, which you also asked, what should I do during my freshman year summer to best position myself for recruitment activities and deadlines and things in your sophomore year, which is a really great question. And if you think ahead, it's important to backwards plan. So let's start from the end. The end is you get multiple offers to investment banking jobs. What, at January, February, something like that, of your sophomore year. So a little less than a year from now, about 9 months from now. And so as you think about that's the ultimate goal, when you backtrack 2 to 3 months, you'll have to have decided what are those 6 to 8 firms you want to recruit at. And the way I would count those 6 to 8 firms does include city, unless you know that it doesn't. Some banks you can apply for one job and they'll look at multiple cities, but not usually. That's going to be a bank by bank thing. But most banks will run a New York process and a Chicago process. Or for Baird, for example, since I like to use Baird, because it's a great bank, they might run a Chicago process and a Milwaukee process. And those processes, they might talk between each other, but when you get an offer, you're getting an offer for that location. And it's important that you have your narrative straight and that people know where you want to be. So while they do intermingle, they are in essence separate processes because they have a number of offers they can give for this location and a number for that location. And they're not like random. They're not just giving them out. It's part of your story as to where you want to go. So the most important, so all that to answer your direct question, what should I be doing this summer? Well, you've got some really important decisions to make in October, November, December. Really important decisions. So the best thing you can do now is research, gather information, ask great questions so you can feel so when you do have to make those tough decisions later on in the fall, you feel really good about your decision. You feel like you've turned over all sorts of stones and explored these questions that you even asked directly to me so that when you have to make that decision about, okay, I'm going gung ho for, you know, Barclays, Jeffries, Lazard, and Bank of America in Chicago. And I'm also going to focus on, SunTrust in Charlotte. I don't know. But you've got this list, and you have that list because you've done networking. So that's the number one thing you need to do this summer is network. So, and that's generic advice. I'm going to give that to everybody. That is a fundamental of investment banking. I bet you've already done networking a little bit. So let me just pause and ask you, tell me more about what efforts up to this point leading into the summer. What have you done in terms of networking up to this point throughout your freshman year? And most importantly, what efforts recently?
Yeah. So throughout my freshman year, I joined a ton of clubs and organizations. A lot of them have been finance and investment banking focused. So through those clubs, I've had direct access to upperclassmen who have already gone through this process and have offers from investment banks. So they've kind of guided me through some common questions, through the process, their experiences, and they told me about like when they started reaching out to investment bankers. And then also our school has had a ton of opportunities where you can talk to professionals in a variety of career paths. So through some of those events, I've gotten to speak with investment bankers face to face, have conversations with them, and ask them questions. And then also through the clubs, we had tons of investment bankers come and join us virtually, and then we could ask them whatever questions we wanted. They're usually currently working in investment banking, so they can tell us about their day to day life, what they like about the industry, what are some things they don't like. And that's about all I've done in terms of actively networking with actual investment bankers. But in terms of preparing for the investment banking recruitment process, I've also started reading the Breaking into Wall Street technical guides, preparing for common questions that are asked during technical interviews, behavioral interviews. One of the clubs I had, we had a mock super day where they walked us through a bunch of the common technical questions that could be asked and behavioral questions. And that's kind of where the focus of my preparation has been so far.
Okay. Let's talk more about networking. So tell me of the networking conversations you've had, what's the one thing that you've learned that jumps out to you from those conversations?
So the biggest thing that's jumped out to me was I've spoken to a lot of investment bankers that work in Chicago primarily, and one thing that they really like is the culture and also like the difference in hours. They say that like although hours can be super intense, just as bad as New York sometimes, generally it's a bit more mild, and they feel that the culture is a bit less cutthroat competitive and a bit more collaborative. A lot of the people at these banks in Chicago also come from Midwest schools, Big Ten schools, whereas in New York, I know a lot of the times they come from, prestigious Ivy League schools. So that's like a big cultural difference, and that's something that really stood out to me, and that's something that really shaped my opinion on like why I would prefer to recruit for Chicago. And then also they talked about the industries that they coverage. I know industrials is like a huge coverage group in Chicago, and they seem to really like it. It seems to be something that it's nobody's first choice originally. It's maybe not as flashy as like technology and some of these other coverage areas, but industrials is something that they've all had really good reviews on. So that's something I'm also attracted to in Chicago.
Cool. Those are great takeaways from networking. I mean, you're hearing real advice from real bankers about the reality of what you're getting into. And what it's impressive of to me about what you just said was that while industrials is not what everyone starts off with, and that's true. Like no one's thinking about, oh well, I want to cover manufacturers of brake pads. That's what I want to cover. That's been my dream. Like no one actually ever says that. Some people do have a dream of covering tech companies. Now, if someone does have a dream of covering brake pads, then that person's probably born to be in banking because that's a really great goal. Actually, it's really specific. Um, but I think at the end of the day, it's I hope you can start to see some of the benefits of the networking because what I can tell you is that if you go to bankers in Chicago, especially bulge bracket, and tell them you want to be in industrials, that's a pretty cool thing to say because that's going to tell them that, all right, this guy Nick understands it. He understands that we don't have a big technology and media team in Chicago, right? Because if you start telling a bunch of Chicago bankers, I want to be in TMT, that's my goal. They're going to be like, okay, well, why are you talking to me? Because I'm in industrials in Chicago, right? Um, and so it's not just about telling people what they want to hear or telling them that your goal is who they are. That's not the purpose. But the purpose is being informed, having lots of conversations, and then being realistic and interested in where the opportunity is. I heard a really interesting saying not too long ago, which puts a spin on the conventional wisdom. You always hear people are like, pursue your passion, pursue your dream, and yeah, you should do that, but it needs to be feasible and there needs to be actual opportunity there. And so instead, what I heard was, first pursue the opportunity. First pursue where the opportunity is and be willing to go to where that opportunity is. And if you go to Chicago, there's much more opportunity in banking and industrials than there is in technology. And so you're using networking as a tool to help you make good decisions and help position yourself more effectively. So I don't know if you were thinking of it like that, but when you tell me all those things, that's how I think of it. So well done on you for learning that about Chicago, a little bit about the Midwest culture and about the industrials piece. Those are things that can start to shape your narrative. Why are you interested in that Midwest oriented culture? Now, banking is banking. Let's not delude ourselves. The hours suck. The work is tough. It is what it is, and it's not so different from Singapore to New York to LA to Chicago. However, the people that are in these organizations are different. They talk differently, they interact differently, they collaborate differently, and there are differences across banks. And there are certainly differences within banks as well, which you should work to tease out. Um, so, so thanks for sharing some of the key things you've done around networking. It sounds like you're generally on the right path. I mean, your goal is to be asking them questions and to learn. So let me put the question back on you. Let's go back to how can you be successful this summer? And let me put the question back on you. Like, what's your plan to be productive this summer? What are you going to be doing?
Yeah, so in the fall, my university has an investment banking academy. So my ultimate goal this summer is to prepare to get into that investment banking academy, and that typically consists of a few different stages, including a case competition, a technical test, and 2 rounds of interviews. The interviews being both behavioral and technical. So I feel right now that I'm in a pretty good position, but I definitely know that the technical test is going to be pretty difficult. So a bulk of the summer I'm going to be spending going through the guides, making sure I understand all the concepts. I don't want to just memorize the answers to the 400 question document. I want to actually understand these questions conceptually so that on the technical test when they throw curveballs at me, I can give like at least a partial response, at least be able to walk them through my thinking, especially in the interviews when they ask me, like, how did you come to that answer? I want to be able to logically explain how I got from step A to step B to step C, and I think that'll really benefit me a lot. So I'm definitely going to spend a good amount of time technical preparation. And then also I want to work on my behavioral questions. I know a lot of common questions that are asked throughout the investment banking recruitment process are why the school you chose, why investment banking, tell me about yourself, tell me about how you work in teams, tell me about a time you failed. All common questions that I should have polished answers to so that when I'm asked those questions in those networking chats or in interviews, I can give a polished answer and I won't be, stumbling on my words.
Yep. Okay, yeah. Well, look, I mean, it sounds like with the application process to that selective prep program within the university, that you already have a bit of a roadmap for how to prepare, and that's some of the genius of that whole program is it helps you guys get up the curve faster. Even the people who don't make it into the club still get the benefit of doing all that prep work of getting ready for it. so they can still be successful. So that's really wise of you to use that application process as a motivating factor to dive in and start to do that work. So my advice would be balance what you're doing. The technicals are important, but you got to be able to talk to people. So you've got to balance the networking with the technicals. What people tend to do on average is they tend to just gravitate to where their strengths are. So if you are really good at talking to people and you're more salesy and you're more talkative and you love to meet people, you're going to err on more networking probably and maybe avoid the technicals. And if you're a technical nerd and you just want to go deep into all the technicals and play on Excel and practice your Adventus modeling and all that stuff, then you might neglect the networking. So think about who are you? What are the things you're more likely to procrastinate on? And if you feel like you're delaying something, then that's your indicator that you've got to prioritize it, get it on the calendar, and do it, even though you don't feel, even though it kind of sucks and you don't feel like it. Um, so yeah, and definitely on the U of I, start to move up. I'm glad you've talked to upperclassmen, what juniors, or excuse me, seniors who have gotten that full-time internship offer, or maybe juniors, or excuse me, rising juniors who have gotten the junior year offer as well. So you've got some folks who have had some success in getting that offer. I think that's great. Now that once you've talked to, I would say, and this is just a, there's nothing magic about these numbers, but once you've talked to a good solid 10 people who have the junior year offer and maybe 10 people who have got the full-time offer, once you've talked to those folks, go ahead and talk to 10 people who are on the job, right? Go ahead and talk to 10 people who are on the job. And then we will, because you're ready for that. Now, you don't want to go start talking to a bunch of managing directors. It's a little bit too early for that. But go start to talk to some alums who are in their first year. And if you're just talking to alums who are in their first year, it doesn't really matter where they are. Definitely prioritize folks in Chicago. Prioritize folks, if you're interested in mid-market, prioritize mid-market. If you're interested in bulge bracket, prioritize bulge bracket. If you don't know, then do half and half, thereabouts. Make sure you're getting a little bit of both. So, So yeah, I think that's yeah, because this is all about prepping for the summer. So my main message is you've got a great program already built in, but make sure you're balancing networking, because the networking is going to help you with the behaviorals. Networking is going to help you with the lingo, using the right words. And when you network, I would also encourage you to keep reading, pick whatever your favorite M&A news source is, and make sure that at least every week you're reading a several page article about a deal that was done. Deals are always getting done. They're always getting talked about. So especially if you're starting to have a niche, focus on industrials. Why not? It doesn't mean you're married to industrials, but at least it's a starting point. The more you have a starting point and something to rally around and focus on, the more you can go deeper into it. And after a certain point, you're going to be like, whoa, I really like this. This is cool. Or, whoa, I really, really like this subsection within industrials. I want to be auto parts, auto part suppliers, right? Or maybe you want to be industrial technology, which is actually part of industrials. And there's a lot of really valuable industrial technology companies, new science and engineering approaches to making something or building something or some cool new product. That isn't, quote, tech, but is actually under industrials. Might be like, because they have it. I think Baird's a good one to look at. Actually, check out Baird Industrials. I do recommend it. They've got a lot of subverticals, and they tend to focus on some really interesting applications and not just the giant industrial organizations. So a couple things to think about. So what should you be doing? And the most important thing over the summer is just set some type of very manageable schedule and stick to it. This is how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. If you got to keep chunking out, take out a chunk here, take out a chunk there, do 2 calls, do some studying, just steady progress every single week. If you just let the summer go and you just go have fun and you forget about it all and just come back in 3 months, obviously you're going to be way behind. Stating the obvious, you're going to be way behind the curve. So not to do that, but it's tough. It's tough. So, cool. All right, Nick. Well, I think what of you had a couple more questions on here, but as you kind of look at those, are there any others that you wanted to talk before we wrap up here?
Yeah, so one last thing I had a question on is what's the timeline? Like, should I start reaching out to investment bankers like right now, or should I wait till closer to the actual recruitment season so as not to like make a mistake that could potentially like hurt me in the long run, or just annoy the bankers that like I'm still just finished my freshman year? Is it too early for me to be like reaching out to them?
Great question. What I would recommend would be we'll go back to what I said a few minutes ago, which is basically you need to be talking to number one, the folks who are 1 year or 2 years ahead of you at school, who would have earned a summer offer, who are about to start their internship here pretty soon. That make sure you talk to at least 10 of those folks. If then talk to folks who have earned their full-time offer, who are about to start full-time, who are graduating soon. Then talk to folks who've been on 10 folks who've been on the desk. Do that now. If you haven't talked to your 10 who have received an internship offer, then what are you waiting for? Right? Maybe you got 2 or 3 more conversations to have. They can be anybody. Don't worry about where they're going. Don't worry about what city they're going to, what type of bank. Well, you're very early on, right? You should be very exploratory. Now, if you have a preference for Chicago, prioritize that. Prioritize Chicago. I'm not saying don't prioritize, but what I'm saying is it's more important that you talk to somebody than at all than it is that they're the perfect person who's going to the exact bank you want or the exact city you want. Right. Prioritize those folks, but it's more important to have the conversation with somebody than to have it with a perfect person. So, how far are you along there? Have you had those 30 conversations I just described, or which ones do you need to work on more?
Um, I would say I've had a good amount of conversations with current sophomores and juniors who have landed an offer but haven't actually worked their investment banking summer internship yet. And then I've also had a good amount of conversations with seniors who finished their summer internship the past summer and then they're returning full time to investment banking this summer. But I haven't had a lot of conversations with those first year analysts and those who have actually started full time work yet. So I think that's an area I definitely need to work on.
So that's the opportunity. Start with U of I alums and then go from there. And you'll know when you're ready to start talking to second year analysts and third year analysts and associates and so forth. When you come fall and you're in that November time frame, you need to be talking to the more senior folks. And at that point, you should have already met more than one managing director. If it comes November and you've talked to zero managing directors, then you're probably off track. So
Mhm.
that's I don't have a hard and fast rule. These are good. These are also questions that I'm gonna give you some general guidance, but you get in there and ask these questions to the 1 year folks who you're going to talk to. Say, hey, how should I think about connecting? How should I think about going up the chain? Is there any steps I should make sure to take? Is there any key timing things that I need to be aware of? How do I know I'm behind in recruiting? That's a good question, right? There's back when I was recruiting, which was 10, well, geez, yeah, 10, 11 years ago. Um, there were certain invites that you would get if you were on track, meaning like you would get invited to this invite only event. Now I guess this was one specific school. I was at Northwestern recruiting for banks, and they had these types of events. But you'd be surprised. Every bank does something. You just got to know what it is. Sometimes you might be invited to a special web, Zoom conversation that's with the recruiting team and with some investment bankers just to kind of meet and greet. They might do that remotely. You just don't really know. But the key is to get to the invite only stuff. It might be as simple as an email. It could be a Zoom or a Teams call, or it could be an actual in-person fun event like at the bowling alley or something. So things to think about. If they're off the beaten path schools, non-course schools, they might have those events in the city where the bank is as opposed to where your school is. So, but those events are always out there. So it's kind of like you want to know what those are so you can plant the seeds so you get invited. is the real way to succeed. So, all right, Nick. Well, hey, I appreciate your time. We're gonna wrap this up. It's been great. Wishing you the best of luck. Keep going at Chicago. My advice to you: be stay laser focused, and you're gonna get what you're looking for, and you'll get multiple offers. If you start to spread that focus, then it's just going to be harder. Doesn't mean you can't do it. Just expect to work, 30 to 50% harder to achieve the same result. So, all right. Well, so we'll appreciate it, and we'll see everyone next time.